Pope Francis said goodbye to his friend, a nun, and his final gesture moved everyone. The walls of Casa Santa Marta were quieter than usual that evening. The curtains swayed lightly with the spring breeze, and somewhere in the distance the bells of St. Peter's Basilica chimed the hour. It was April 20th, 2025, the last night before the world would change forever. In his private room, Pope Francis sat propped up in bed, wrapped in a plain white blanket. His once strong frame seemed so small now, the weight of the years etched into every line of his face, but his eyes, they still shone, bright, warm, alive. He was waiting. The doctors had offered medicine to ease the pain, but he had waved them off gently. "Not yet," he had said. "I have someone I must see first." The door creaked open, and a figure entered the dimly lit room. A woman in a simple black habit, a worn crucifix around her neck. Her name was Sister Lucia. She was not famous, not powerful. She was not a cardinal or a diplomat. She was simply someone who had walked beside him for more than 50 years. Through poverty, through sickness, through prayers whispered in the slums of Buenos Aires long before the world ever called him Pope. When Sister Lucia approached the bedside, she faltered for a moment. The sight of him, so frail, so near the end, stole her breath away. But Francis smiled. He reached out a trembling hand. "Lucia," he whispered, his voice a rasp, but filled with the tenderness of a lifetime. "You came." Tears welled in her eyes as she took his hand in both of hers, pressing it to her forehead as she had done so many times before in moments of prayer. "I could never refuse you, Holy Father," she said, though to her he would always simply be Jorge, the friend who had once patched the soles of her shoes when she could not afford new ones, the young priest who had taught her that greatness was not found in titles, but in serving the ones the world forgot. They sat in silence for a long moment, their hands clasped tightly. Around them, the world moved on. Nurses, guards, whispered conversations in the hallway, but inside that small room, time seemed to stop. Francis looked at her carefully, as if memorizing every wrinkle, every threadbare line of her habit. "You remember the vow we made?" he asked. Lucia nodded, unable to speak. They had made it long ago as two young dreamers standing in a crumbling church in Buenos Aires. "Wherever we go, whatever we become, we serve the forgotten first." Lucia blinked back tears. "You kept it better than anyone." Francis shook his head slowly. "We kept it." He squeezed her hand weakly. "I have one last favor to ask," he said. "Anything," Lucia whispered. Francis gestured toward a small wooden box on the table by the window. Inside was a simple chain. No gold, no jewels. Just a small iron cross worn thin by years of being clutched during desperate prayers. "My mother gave me that when I was a boy," he said. "Whenever I was afraid, I would hold it." Lucia reached for it carefully and placed it in his hands. Francis closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The cross nestled between his fingers. Then, with great effort, he lifted it and placed it around Sister Lucia's neck. "For you," he whispered, "so you'll never forget. That love is stronger than fear." Lucia's shoulders shook with silent sobs. She clutched the cross to her chest, feeling its weight, feeling his blessing. A nurse poked her head into the room, eyes red from crying. "It's time, sister," she said gently. "We must let him rest." But Francis shook his head again. "Stay," he said. "Pray with me." So she knelt beside his bed, just as she had knelt beside him decades ago when they were both nothing more than servants in the poorest parts of Argentina. Together they recited the Our Father, her voice steady and strong, his a faint whisper carried more by heart than breath. Our Father, who art in heaven. As they reached the final words, Sister Lucia felt a change. Francis's hand loosened in hers. His breathing slowed, and a peace, deeper than any cathedral silence, heavier than any bell's toll, settled over the room. Tears spilled down Sister Lucia's face as she pressed her forehead to his frail hand one last time. "Lead us not into temptation," she whispered through sobs, "but deliver us from evil." When she lifted her head, Pope Francis was smiling, eyes closed, face serene, gone from this world, but not gone from her heart, never from her heart. In the hallways, cardinals wept openly, guards lowered their heads, doctors who had spent their careers hardened against death found themselves wiping away tears they could not explain, because they had not only witnessed the passing of a pope, they had witnessed the final, simplest, purest moment of a man who had lived exactly the way he had taught others to, humbly, lovingly, faithfully. Sister Lucia remained kneeling beside the bed long after the final breath had slipped from Pope Francis's lips. The weight of the moment anchored her there, heavy and sacred. It wasn't until the aides entered, faces drawn, moving as if through water, that she finally rose. She pressed a final kiss to the Pope's hand, now cooling, and tucked the iron cross he had given her safely beneath the folds of her habit. Word spread quietly but swiftly through the Vatican halls. No bells yet, no announcements, just whispered phrases passed from guard to priest to sister. He's gone. Francisco is gone. The sky over Rome darkened unnaturally early that evening, clouds gathering like mourners cloaking the sun. By the time the official announcement was made, candles had already begun appearing in windows across the city, in the narrow alleys, in grand piazzas, on forgotten doorsteps. Rome wept. The funeral preparations moved with solemn urgency. It was decided that the Pope's body would lie in state for a day before the final Mass. Not in splendor, but in a plain wooden casket he had chosen himself years ago. On April 23rd, as thousands lined up quietly outside St. Peter's Basilica, something unexpected happened. A rumor spread among the mourners. A nun, small, cloaked in black, holding a simple iron cross, had been the last to see him alive, had held his hand, had prayed the final prayer. Someone had seen her leave the room clutching something to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Someone else had overheard her whisper, "He taught me that love is stronger than fear." In a matter of hours, the quiet story spread like wildfire, not a story of power, not of miracles, but of something deeper, of friendship, of loyalty, of humility. When the casket was brought into the basilica, a wave of silence fell over the crowd, so absolute it seemed the very stones held their breath. Cardinals in crimson lined the path. World leaders stood shoulder to shoulder with beggars and orphans. And at the very front of the line, head bowed low, stood Sister Lucia. She didn't wear a gold pin or an official badge. There was no seat reserved for her among dignitaries. She simply stood, the cross he had given her hanging heavy against her heart. And as the pallbearers set down the casket before the altar, Sister Lucia moved. She stepped forward, trembling slightly, and laid a single white rose atop the casket. No grand speech, no rehearsed prayer, just a flower and a whispered word. Gracias. thank you. The act was small, but it shattered the silence like a hymn. People began to cry openly. Toughened guards wiped their eyes. Dignitaries clasped their hands to their chests. In that one simple gesture, Sister Lucia had captured the very soul of Pope Francis's life. Humble gratitude, unshakable love, unwavering faith. Later that evening, journalists flooded the airwaves with tributes to the Pope's legacy. They spoke of reforms, of outreach, of history. But among ordinary people, among the cab drivers and market sellers and school children, the story that lived was simpler. Did you hear about the nun? He gave her his mother's cross before he died. He blessed her with his last breath. It became a legend overnight, not one built by scholars, but by hearts. Sister Lucia didn't seek the spotlight. She returned quietly to her small room in the convent just outside the city walls, away from the cameras and crowds. The iron cross still rested against her chest, now worn warm from being held so tightly. Every evening at dusk, she would light a candle by her window, not for fame, not for sorrow, but for remembrance, a promise made, a life shared, a love that death could not silence. On April 26, 2025, when the final funeral mass was held at the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, Sister Lucia stood again among the sea of mourners. She didn't speak aloud, but anyone who caught her eye saw the quiet flame still burning there, the reflection of a man who had lived by faith, walked by humility, and died with gratitude on his lips. And when the choir lifted their voices in the ancient hymn in Paradisum, Sister Lucia pressed the cross once more to her heart and whispered, "Well done, good and faithful servant." The candles flickered, the bells tolled, and somewhere beyond sight, beyond sorrow, beyond all the burdens of flesh and pain, a simple man from Buenos Aires smiled. Finally home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more emotional, dramatic, and unexpected tales. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love hearing from all of you. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep watching.